a lot of times we'll say, oh, I think for myself and I critically think, but if my favorite presenter says this, I just kind of believe it. As opposed to my favorite presenter says this and I go, okay, yeah, I can see how they got there, or maybe I would formulate my opinion a little differently. Like it's just a slight difference, but that reliance on the presenter being, your source of truth versus creating a space to explore truth, it can be a different thing. The censorship, there's kind of two layers of it. The first layer really begins in 2017 with the US election. But this was the first time that something was different in the way the candidates were for this election. Specifically when you're looking at Hillary and Trump and you're seeing what's happening, and there's something very different about this, right? And again, that's a deeper conversation, but the general point is that the people in control of, media and Google and YouTube and Facebook and whatever, all seemed to be heavily on Hillary's side. Then you enter into 2020 with the whole, C-19 conversation, and now you're getting into another layer that is not only a lot more extreme and completely unpredictable, but it's to the point where you're sitting there having somewhat of an existential crisis, trying to determine whether or not you can publish something that's completely based on fact, because it goes against the narrative. So you're like, if I publish this and this goes on Facebook, they could just delete my page. If I publish this and put it on YouTube, they could just delete the account. You can hold the position in yourself that says, I'm going to do what I feel is right no matter what. And I'm going to say what I think needs to be said because I'm going to hold true to my truth. And you can take that approach and believe that, the universe is on your side, but you're playing within a culture that is dead set on shutting down anybody who's saying anything they don't like. There are certain conversations that I would be curious to have, and I'm not sure we could have right now. And what the problem is people who want to have those conversations then get relegated to BitChute or Rumble or Odyssey, where from our experience, you're now you're kind of more prone to the fringes and the echo chambers of not having good challenging questions and sense making going on at that level. Instead, that's what exists on YouTube, is people challenging each other a lot. And don't get me wrong, there ends up being a sense of an echo chamber on a YouTube channel as well, but there's a lot more opportunity for there to be diverging views. Whereas in those alternative platforms, it becomes like very much one view. So this news package is essentially prepared by who, I'm not 100% sure, but it would be some PR company. And it would just get disseminated and everybody's just literally going and reading it. Now, does that happen, that script, does that happen for other news stories where the culture of mainstream media is holding a line? No, that would be a little bit different. So like the mainstream perspective on the Freedom Convoy, for example, was not like, hey guys, we all need to say this exact same thing. It's more so like you control those journalists by culture and by echo chambers within the culture you create in your newsroom. And there are times where you might have somebody who is influencing a newsroom director. I mean, we saw this even with Project Mockingbird, which essentially revealed that intelligence agencies were developing relationships with certain key individuals inside a media organization so that they can get certain stories to go the way they wanted. In more modern times, sometimes it's as simple as, it's very political. Like, look, if you want to keep that, hey, we need you to hold this kind of line. Or a politician who's kind of getting the gears from a media organization calls up and says, look, if you want access to us and you want to continue to be able to do news stories with us, you need to hold this line, right? So there's so much of that plays into it as well. But I would say overwhelmingly, the largest factor that I think is important for people to understand is purely cultural. So you become part of an echo chamber inside that newsroom that is everybody thinking the same way. Nobody wants to ask that difficult question. Nobody wants to be the conspiracy theorist at the table. Is media controlled? Well, if you can control and engineer mass culture, you can basically control and engineer media. And to me, that's what's going on. There's a larger sort of social engineering of what is acceptable inside mass culture, through which then the media often will regulate themselves into that little box. What happened in Canada is a perfect example of there's something wrong. Here you had a prime minister, which, keep in mind, most people who are not privy to Canadian politics might not know that only 30% of the country voted for Trudeau. All these other countries are dropping these mandates. I don't think any other country in the world to date has a policy that doesn't let people leave. Pretty well every other country in the entire world. And yet here in Canada, the culture in the media is, well, you know, we really need to think hard about whether we should drop this mandate, as if like everybody else in the world has this mandate in place. Like the fact that our stock markets are doing as well as they're doing after everything that's makes no sense. Money has just been stripped out of the people massively. Everything would suggest that people are struggling and therefore the markets should be struggling, but it's the opposite. The corporations are laughing. I believe we're in a time where it's very, very difficult to know what's going to happen 6 months from now, never mind a year from now. I don't think it's a bad idea to sort of diversify into some of these other options. But I think the biggest thing, and what I tell people all the time, is find ways to minimize debts, to live as simply as possible. And I don't mean live, you know, oh, like you have nothing. I'm talking about live within your means, whatever those means are, live within them, and learn how to grow food, and learn how to be somewhat self-sustainable, how to work within local community. Because if something does happen, that support network will be there, and that knowledge to do certain things will be there, because I don't think anybody can reasonably predict what's going to happen. Like, we almost don't sit enough and get to calm and think and engage and feel and determine whether we're just stuck in our minds about a topic or whether how we actually feel about a topic, because we don't do that as much as we did perhaps as a collective in 1500, where life was so much slower. Maybe it's time to slow down media. Maybe it's time to try and ask deeper questions. There's something about this that's driving me, even though it doesn't fit into what I thought I should be doing. That impulse is part of the intelligence of the body, the intelligence of the system, the intelligence of perhaps a deeper energy that, again, whether you want to call it your higher self, whether you want to call it your heart to your, you know, God, whatever it is that you want to put a label on it, that's part of what's guiding you to do what you need to do. So embodiment then becomes really important.